In our childhood memories, Revenge of the Nerds, 1984, was just a loud, goofy comedy about a bunch of nerds getting even. But watching it again as adults, we see something far more unsettling. The underdog slowly turning into the very bully he once hated. Lewis isn't just the lovable outsider. He uses technology to invade privacy, hides behind righteous excuses to quiet his guilt, and even builds romance on a foundation of deception. Behind every laugh lies a moral crack we never noticed as kids. In this video, we'll uncover 14 hidden truths about Revenge of the Nerds, 1984. The darker layers buried beneath that seemingly harmless nerdy grin. And if you enjoy deep diving into these childhood rewatches, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the upcoming parts. Part 1. The lovable underdog who slowly becomes a bully himself. Right from the beginning, Louis Skolnick is drawn as a gentle nerd with simple dreams. Have friends, have a place to live, have a place in college life. But a truth many viewers miss is that the deeper the story goes, the more Louis starts repeating the very behavior he hates in the Alpha Betas. When he's kicked out of the dorm, he feels humiliated, treated like an object. Yet later, he and the nerds invade the sorority's private space, treating the women's dorm like their own secret playground in the name of revenge. Every time he laughs in satisfaction after a prank, Louis's eyes lose a bit of their innocence and gain a new emotion. I'm finally the one in control. That's the first negative pattern. Someone who was once a victim starts to enjoy having the upper hand without really questioning what that says about his own morality. Part 2. Gilbert, the moral mirror. Louis keeps avoiding Gilbert Lowe is often seen as the harmless best friend, less flashy than Louis. But in reality, he's the moral compass of the group. In several scenes, Gilbert hesitates when the revenge plans go too far, while Louis is the one pushing. It's time we show them what we can do. Something subtle. Whenever Gilbert feels uneasy, he looks to Louis for reassurance. And Louis almost always calms him with simple, even cliché lines. The repeated pattern is this. Louis knows he's crossing the line, but he borrows Gilbert's trust to cover up his own guilt. They're both the protagonists of the story, but from the outside, Gilbert gradually becomes a passive accomplice, dragged into a darker orbit of revenge where right and wrong blur more and more. Part 3. Tri-lambdas and the racial subtext many younger viewers miss. In the film, Lambda 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 is introduced as a national black fraternity, while the nerds are just a small chapter within that system. Hidden behind the story of losers teaming up with outsiders is another layer about overlap between nerds, minorities, and people pushed to the margins of society. From Louis's perspective, this is his first real sense that he isn't alone. The shame of being mocked for his intelligence or appearance suddenly connects with the pain of being dismissed because of skin color or background. But the negative pattern is still there. Once he has the shield of Tri-lambdas behind him, he starts to see his extreme actions as part of a noble fight for justice, instead of admitting that he is often using fairness as a cover for personal revenge. Part 4. Hidden cameras and the dark truth about nerds using technology. One of the big laugh-out-loud moments at the time was the nerds secretly installing cameras to spy on the sorority. Viewers back then often treated it as a clever tech prank. But from inside Louis's mind, this is a very clear step downward. He's using his technical talent, the thing he's proudest of, to violate other people's privacy. And that pattern repeats, from peeping with cameras to disguises, masks, and other tech tricks to cross boundaries without permission. The film accidentally creates an archetype. If a genius is bullied, he has the right to use technology for anything. Lewis becomes the face of that pattern. The more successful his schemes become, the less he asks, "Should I do this?" and the more he focuses on "I can do this." Part 5. Winning. Betty. When love is built on deception. The moment Lewis disguises himself as Stan to be with Betty is staged as a romantic, comedic high. The nerd wins the cheerleader's heart and flips the social order on campus. Yet from today's viewpoint, many critics, and even people involved with the film, have acknowledged that this is essentially a sexual encounter under false identity, which means real consent is not there. Inside Lewis, that scene is the pinnacle of his revenge. He doesn't just beat Stan, he takes the girl who once dismissed him. But if you line that up with what came before, spying, breaking in, sneaking around in disguise, you see a very clear chain of negative behaviors. Every time Lewis steps further over a moral line, the story rewards him with a victory, making it easy for him, and part of the audience, to confuse being accepted with forcing the world to bend to his will. Part 6. The Gandhi-style finale. A noble message that hides the cracks. In the final stadium scene, Lewis steps forward, conquering his fear to proudly declare that he's a nerd and calls on anyone who's ever been bullied to join him. The filmmakers have said they wanted a non-violent, Gandhi-inspired ending instead of an earlier idea where the nerds literally destroy the Alpha-Beta house. From Lewis's point of view, this is a moment of true liberation. For the first time, he doesn't hide behind pranks or tricks, but uses his real voice. But there's a truth few people talk about. That speech also conveniently washes away the shady acts that came before. The pattern repeats after every morally questionable scheme. The story cleanses it with a grand, heroic gesture, making it easy for viewers to forget that the road leading up to that heroic moment wasn't pure at all. Part 7. The father's nerd laugh, a tiny detail turned into legend. James Cromwell, who plays Lewis's father, invented that odd nasal nerd laugh himself to make the character more distinctive. He later realized he'd accidentally created an iconic little quirk, and the rest of the cast started copying that laugh. For Lewis, the moment he and his dad share the same laugh isn't just a gag, it's an emotional thread. I'm like you, Dad, not in looks, but in accepting his nerd identity. A small improvisation on set unexpectedly becomes a bridge for the audience. It helps explain why Lewis has the courage to stand up at the end. He isn't just representing young nerds, but an older generation who've also been laughed at for being different long before him. Part 8. The real-life battle. Colleges afraid of being tarnished. Before filming, the production ran into pushback from real universities. One school initially agreed to let them shoot on campus, then backed out after reading the script, worried the film would make college life look bad. They only relented under conditions: no overly offensive scenes in the middle of campus, and no disruption of academic activities. If you place Lewis into this real-world context, there's a neat parallel. In the movie, Dean Ulich is caught between the football team and his responsibility to all students. In reality, university administrators were caught between the glamour of Hollywood and the fear of public backlash. The power pattern repeats. The weaker side, students' nerds, can only exist as long as they don't embarrass the system. Even when their story finally gets told, that story still has to be negotiated with those who hold the power. Part 9. The soundtrack of illusion. When the music hides the darkness, Revenge of the Nerds uses a lot of 80s pop and rock tracks, like Burning Down the House, We Are the Champions, even Thriller. Some of these songs never made it onto the official soundtrack album, but play over key moments in the film. For Lewis, those songs are like the echo of his dream. Every time he moves closer to victory, the music explodes, making every moral boundary suddenly feel fun. Most viewers don't notice that the soundtrack is used as a kind of camouflage. It turns scenes of spying, pranks, and even outright deception into cool sequences. The negative pattern continues. Whenever a boundary is crossed, the film quickly wraps it in a joke or a rousing song, soothing any sense of wrongness in both the character's heart and the audience's mind. Part 10. From a criticized comedy to a proud nerd landmark. When it first came out, the movie drew plenty of criticism for crude humor and stereotypical portrayals of women and minorities. Some critics argued the message of tolerance was at odds with the way the film treated female characters and people of color. Yet over time, the image of Lewis standing on the football field, proudly claiming the word nerd, has been embraced by many as an early cinematic moment of geek pride. For some people, it helped push nerd culture into the mainstream. Inside Lewis, this is the first time he truly feels seen. The paradoxical truth is that a story full of problematic details accidentally became a symbol of liberation for people who once felt ashamed of their brains or their differences. That's the film's core pattern. It mixes toxic elements with genuinely moving moments, leaving the legacy of its main character both inspiring and very hard to accept uncritically today. Part 11. Behind the scenes, like a real fraternity of misfits. Cast members have said that the atmosphere on set felt like a real fraternity. They lived together, hung out, partied, and pranked each other, just like a real group of college friends. From Lewis's vantage point, that explains why scenes of the nerds hanging out in their rundown house feel so authentic. It isn't just acting, it's real group chemistry transferred straight onto the screen. An interesting truth here is that while their characters are fighting to be accepted, in real life, playing the losers made the actors themselves into a tight-knit, highly visible group, ironically not so different from the sports fraternities the film is mocking. The recurring contrast. The more they portray exclusion, the more included and recognized they themselves become. Part 12. When the real Tri-Lambdas were born, Lewis's story steps into real life. Years after the movie's release, real Lambda 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 fraternities were formed at some American universities, inspired by the fictional version, but open to a wide range of students, seen through Lewis's journey. This is a striking truth. A character who only dreamed of a place where all misfits could belong ends up indirectly inspiring actual communities in the real world, places where students of all races, orientations, and backgrounds can find acceptance. The pattern of being oppressed and then rising up gets transformed. Instead of getting revenge through pranks, real people chose to build lasting organizations, creating spaces where no one has to relive the humiliation the nerds go through in the film. Part 13. The failed remake. When changing times made old jokes unacceptable. In the 2000s, there was a serious attempt to remake Revenge of the Nerds. Locations were scouted, and production even moved between universities. But the project ran into trouble and was ultimately shut down. One big reason: it was almost impossible to balance the original spirit with modern standards. Jokes that seemed edgy in the 80s now clearly crossed ethical lines. If Lewis existed in that later era, many of the things he saw as deserved payback would be called by their proper names: harassment, invasion of privacy, deception. This reflects a wider pattern in film history. Characters, once celebrated as heroes, sometimes have to be rewritten or quietly dropped when society finally pays attention to the invisible victims who paid the price for those laughs. Part 14. A double-edged legacy. Is Lewis a symbol of freedom or a warning sign? 4 decades later, Revenge of the Nerds still sparks debate. On one hand, it shows a generation of bookish kids that they can stand tall, be proud of their intelligence, and exist without asking for permission from the powerful. On the other hand, Lewis's chain of negative actions, from spying and invading private spaces to deception in intimate relationships, forms a very clear pattern. When the powerless gain power but never truly examine themselves, they can easily repeat the same harm they once hated. The deepest truth about Lewis may be this: he is both the dream of liberation for anyone who was ever mocked for being different and a warning about how easily we justify hurting others just because they did it first. That's why each time adults revisit the film, they discover layers they never saw as kids. And these 14 truths about Lewis aren't just about a raunchy 80s comedy, they're about the darker side of our human hunger to be respected at any cost.